And we're back in the studio like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Thursday evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. So the expectation would be that I'm going to do an episode on Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven, which was released on this day, August 7th, 1992. So celebrating its 33rd anniversary. But I have talked about Clint Eastwood frequently. I have discussed the movie Unforgiven a lot, and I've gotten into the particulars of Clint's career back then and how it kind of relates to why he is still able to make movies as recently as 2024's Juror Number 2. But I decided I don't need to do another episode on a movie that I have discussed multiple times. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to take you back 2 summers, and in some ways a story that I have told, but it's a story that I told when I had, 95% less people following this podcast, audio and video wise, as far as, the YouTube channel and everything else. So it's possible that some of you have wondered, well, what I do when I'm not podcasting. And I've talked about my fledgling screenwriting career, but it stands to reason. And I was always curious as a kid when you meet an older person or maybe someone in your age bracket and you wonder, well, how does a guy like this get to be a guy like this? Or how does somebody like me, how did I literally end up in this house? What were the mechanics of it? And was it hard work? Was it just good luck? Was it a combination of both? Like, how did it happen? Where did I start? Where did I start to end up here? So, in broad strokes, I have always lived on Long Island. I grew up in Massapequa, the home of, the original home of the Baldwin brothers, Jerry Seinfeld, and a notorious gentleman by the name of Joseph Buttafuoco. I started in Massapequa, spent the first 18 years of my life there. Went to all the Massapequa schools, graduated Massapequa High with the class of 1992 on June 28th, 1992. The campus of SUNY Farmingdale is where we had our commencement exercises. But after Massapequa, there were a lot of issues which I don't need to go over again, and I moved in with my father. He lived in Woodbury, so I spent the next just about 4 years of my life living in an apartment in what is now called Eagle Rock, just as Jericho Turnpike is about to, well, if you take Route 135, but it's just where the Route 135 entrance is, and the last exit on Route 135 is Jericho Turnpike or Route 25. So I lived there for 4 years. And then I moved with my father, who bought a house in Huntington. It was a new construction. And I moved with him to the house in Huntington, where I lived from 1996, still a college student, before the Yankees went on their legendary 4 World Series in 5 seasons run, something that's never going to happen again in baseball, that's for sure, with all the extra layers of playoffs. You kidding me? Playoffs? Yes, never happening again because of all the extra layers of playoffs. So I lived in that house in Huntington with my dear old dad from 1996 to 2012. Now, you start doing the math and you say, okay, well, how old was he in 96? How old was he in 2012? Well, I can do the math for you. I was 22 and then I was 38. So at no time during that entire stretch was there any realistic possibility that I was going to move out. Now, in theory, my father could have dropped me on my head and said, okay, fend for yourself. But he wasn't that kind of personality. So as I graduated New York University in 97, my coursework was finished in 96, but I wanted to walk with the class of 97. I didn't want the kind of pseudo graduation ceremony that they would have had for the fall 96 people who were ready to graduate. I don't know that many. I don't remember anybody actually graduating in the kind of half-year graduation, but that's neither here nor there. So I began my screenwriting career, such as it is, such as it was, and that's what I did. I didn't have any other actual job. Now, I did other stuff. I worked for magazines. I did some temporary work for a few accounting firms, helping them with their website, but not from the graphic designer perspective, simply from content perspective. So yeah, I did content creation. I was a content provider, but I was writing screenplays and I was attempting to get various projects set up during that time. And in 2012, that's the year in which I got married. And that's when I finally moved out. But it's not like I had any master plan. I never really considered and thought of myself living on my own. I did everything very, very slowly. I matured at a glacial pace. It just took me a long time to figure out stuff that, I got to be honest, most people, forget my age bracket, most people younger than me figured it out. But I was, unfortunately, I didn't look like someone who would be considered delicate, but I was. You know, you had to be very careful, treat me with kid gloves. My parents tried a tough love approach when I was 12, and it did not work out well for anybody. But I didn't move out until I was 38 going on 39. And I moved to Westbury with my bride at that particular time. Lived in Westbury for about 3 years, just around 3 years. And then moved to an apartment in Huntington, which is, when I talk about apartment in Huntington, this is the same one. I didn't have more than one apartment in Huntington. So lived in Huntington Village. And then my dad's health went downhill in the latter portion of 2021. And my sister and I got things together. We tried to do the best that we could, but he went downhill. He went downhill really fast. And then in the early spring of 2022, with my dad's blessing, almost literally, I put pen to paper on what became this place right here. It was just a hole in the ground. Now, if you're not familiar with how they build these developments, the style isn't always the same, but conceptually, it's very similar. Where my father lived in Huntington, it was not the same style as this place here, but it was the same idea, which is that they build big structures. At least part of the design plan for the layout is that they build, let's just say, an enormous building, and they slice it, not literally, but figuratively, they slice it into 4 townhouses. Sometimes they're going to be identical, as in the case of my father's place, where he was, I believe they were. But other times, they have it set up and they build it in such a way that they'll have 2 of each style. That's how they did it here, that the end of the building, the 2 townhouses at the end of the building, is not exactly the same style as the 2 in the middle of the building. So it's like you see a hole in the ground, and it's not, yeah, it looks like it's built into one house, but it would be palatial estate level as far as the amount of square footage that you would have if this was just somebody's house, and not that, no, your house is here and your neighbor's house is there and another neighbor's house is there and another neighbor's house is there. But I like the concept. It was very similar to what my father had in Huntington. Biggest difference is this place has a basement and there are amenities and there are actually grounds. We're surrounded by a nature preserve on all sides. Let me tell you something. Growing up in Massapequa, okay, and you guys can confirm this if you're fellow Massapequans, if you've driven through it. There are signs, maybe there aren't signs anymore. When I was growing up, there were signs all over Massapequa telling us to be careful because there could be deer. There were either a picture of a deer, like a stencil drawing on a sign, or something that said Deer Zing with an X, not a Z. Deer Zing, deer crossing. I am here to testify to the fact that in more than 18 years of living in Massapequa, I never saw a single deer. Not one. So whoever put those signs up, whoever brilliant idea, maybe it was Robert Moses, I don't know, where were they? Where were the deer? Because I didn't see any deer. And I can also testify to the fact that just walking around here, there are deer all over the place. So maybe those signs were supposed to be put out here, and for whatever reason, they were put in Massapequa. My father, though, continued to go downhill, and he passed in the summer of 2022. And What it meant was, now he believed that he thought he had another 10 years. And so the original plan was that we were going to sell his house to finance this one. I don't want you thinking that I just had a random 700 grand laying around. I didn't. I didn't hit it big as a screenwriter. And honestly, even if I did, would you really do that? Right? You have a house to sell and you have a house to buy. Now, I do know people that have had enough success in their lives where they were able to buy, let's say, a $2 million home not far from Ohika Castle. And they didn't have to sell their other house. That's what we call a winner at life. That's really getting something done there. That you don't have to be in a panic and just scrambling to do one so that you can do the other and not get caught short. So sometime in late 2022 is when I should have gotten myself together and moved out of the apartment in Huntington Village no later than, let's say, the end of January. That would have been the wisest course of action. But I didn't do that. I didn't get out until more like the end of March into early April. But my sister and I, we started to get our father's house together to put on the market. We didn't know exactly when we were going to do it. And the reality is, people can tell you what the experience is going to be, what I'm describing. The real estate market, doesn't matter if it's Long Island or anywhere else. But when you're going to sell a house, if your best case scenario is you sell one house and give yourself enough time to use the proceeds to not put a down payment, you've already done that, but to complete the transaction on the other house so that you don't have a mortgage, so that it's just, whatever, so you don't have a mortgage. They can tell you what to do in broad strokes, but until you're actually experiencing it, you're going to make a lot of mistakes, as I made a series of very dumb mistakes that could have easily been avoided, but I didn't ask enough questions at the right times. I didn't ask enough questions, period, and things very nearly went kablooey. Now, what we did do correctly, my sister and I, is we cleared out our father's house. And by that, I mean, he didn't have that much junk, but we had a lot of stuff in there that we could give to Goodwill. There was a lot of stuff that really wasn't salvageable, and we can just, get rid of this. So it took a couple of months, but we cleared the place out. And probably as early as February of 2023, in theory, we could have put the house on the market. Now, the builders of this place had alerted me that there was a possibility that I could have a closing date of sometime in June. When I came over here in March, the house looked like they hadn't even started building yet. What I mean is the inside looked as if it was untouched, and it still seemed like a little bit of a skeleton. I said, this can't possibly be ready by June 15th. Now, I should have asked another question. I should have called the builders. I said, look, are you seriously looking at a June 15 closing? Or you're going to have to postpone it. Either way is fine, but just give me an idea. I didn't do that. I just said, it's not going to be ready till September. I made an assumption. You know what they say about assumptions. I should not have made an assumption. So I didn't get out of the apartment until the first part of April. And I didn't move with enough speed. By this point in time, my sister was getting ready to, to relocate for work. And I didn't ask those questions that I needed to ask. And the only thing that I was worried about, this is ridiculous but true, I was worried about a kind of nightmare scenario, which was not a nightmare scenario, but I perceived it as a nightmare scenario. That if the house in Huntington was put on the market too soon, it was going to sell, and the other house wasn't going to be ready for a number of months after house A sold. And then where do I live? Where do I go? Where do we go, Stallion? Yeah, where do I go, Stallion? Because I sure as hell can't be born again. Where do I go? Well, I said, all right, I guess I'll just have to live with my mom in Florida for a couple of months. I love my mother, but I don't like that Florida weather, particularly in the summer months, which is what we would be talking about here. So I began to low-key panic. We can't put Dad's house on the market too quickly. We got to wait until I get more information about the house. So that right there, that was almost a fatal error. That was almost a fatal error. Worrying about a scenario as if it's a worst case scenario that, bro, what the fuck are you talking about? You could have a hotel. You could spend a few weeks with your mom. This is not dire. You also don't even know. You could sell the house and the person might not be moving in and they may not tell you you must vacate immediately. Remember what I just said. They may not tell you that you need to vacate immediately because they're not going to be around for a number of months. These are all things that somebody could have told me or I could have asked, but that's something I honestly did not think to ask. I thought as soon as the papers are signed, you got to get the fuck out of here. No, sometimes, but not necessarily. So in the third week of May, Dad's house should have been on the market for a month. And in theory, well, no, we should have sold it already. It should have already been sold by the third week in May. We should have just taken my chances. Then I get notification, oh, okay. You got a June 22nd closing. You can close as late as June 30th without a penalty. That was the start of the most intense, mostly negative, 6 weeks that I had experienced in the first 49 years of my life. And there were a number of times that it looked like it was over, that we were just fucked. And what this means, being more specific, being fucked, that the amount of money that had already gone into this house was going to be a sunk cost and that I was going to get defaulted for a lack of payment. Because, you don't just sign a couple of papers and then they say, okay, this is your house, and then you're going to give us 600 grand, even more than that at the very end. No, it doesn't work like that. You could put down a down payment, but in this case, because there was no house, we put down what's called a binder, 10% of the theoretical purchase price up front. But then you have enhancements and modifications. You want raised toilets? Yeah, okay. Well, that costs money. You want a deck? You want a patio? Well, yeah, that costs money too. Do you want the marble or granite countertops? That costs money too. Everything costs money. Everything is extra, because they can just, actually, I shouldn't say everything. If you want the kind of lowest end, there's still stuff you're going to have to pay for that's not in the original specs. That's the way this works. So we were in for a lot of money already. And the price of the models had gone up around $45,000 from when I put pen to paper until the early part of the summer of 2023. So when you talk about how much actual cash was sunk, and then this property is worth more, so you're actually ahead by $45,000 over people who are walking in now buying the same model, you're talking about an amount of money that you can't act like, well, it's okay if it doesn't work out. Or even, it's okay, maybe we'll get 25% of the investment back. No. None of that is okay. There's bad, and then there's worse. Those were the two things. It was either going to be bad or it was going to be worse. So as I sputtered and panicked, there were a number of people in my life they know who they are, who rallied to my defense and rallied to figure out a strategy to not fail. And the other thing that happened, which was almost the nail in the coffin, the closed casket of this crazy sequence, is the fact that as soon as my sister and I put our father's house on the market, we got a buyer almost immediately. And we agreed. We had a handshake agreement. We had a verbal agreement. We were going to do the walkthrough. This would have still been in May. Now, it's possible that the money from the sale wouldn't have come through in time for June 30th, but we wouldn't have been late more than a week. And in those kinds of situations, when the realtor sees what's going on, they're certainly not going to play hardball. They might say, okay, we'll charge you $200 a day, but it looks like we're going to get this done by the first week in July. So they don't overstress. This is the kind of thing that does happen, and some of you might be able to, from experience, say, "Oh yeah, this happened to so and so, my mother, my sister, my brother. It actually happened to me." But this guy agreed to purchase price, and then he He picked up his stake and he moved along. So we then did not actually get another buyer for more than a month. And it was very sticky and very touch and go whether or not we were ever going to be able to get this done. But with the various people helping me out, and one of the aces in the hole was that an attorney that I didn't actually work with this guy, but an attorney that who was in my orbit knew the realtor personally. And it's not that he didn't threaten him. It wasn't that kind of thing, but when people know people, it's different. When it's personal, not in a negative way, it's different. So there was a moment where my lawyer called me sometime in late July and said, Jer, I think we've reached the end of the road. It's time to see if we can get some of your investment back. And that was about as low of a low point as I could have ever imagined, given the circumstances. Given that I had been put into a really favorable situation, how could I have let it get to this point? How could I have screwed it up so badly? We should have, then you start the recriminations. Why wasn't I out of the apartment by the end of January? Why didn't we just put the house on the market in March? We had it cleaned out. There was nothing preventing us from doing that. Why didn't we just take our chances? Okay, maybe you'll sell it too soon. You'll be uncomfortable for a month. Big fucking deal. But in those desperate days, those desperate times, my instinct in almost all instances would be to be deferential. And if somebody says, here's what I think we should do, even if I don't like it, I'm probably going to agree because I don't want confrontation. I am not that kind of a person. I don't like losing my temper, certainly not publicly. Don't want any part of it. But in this instance, when the lawyer, not the guy that I was a different lawyer, when he said, I think we have to try to navigate a buy it, maybe you can get some of your investment back. No, I was seeing dollar signs and I heard the voices of my father and his father, neither of whom would have gotten themselves caught in this situation because they were the kinds of guys, they would have sold the house first. Don't worry about the second part of it. If your closing depends upon the money don't even think about trying to time it. Get it done now. That's real. You got $147,000 in equity, kiddo. You don't piss that away. You fight to the last. You go down swinging. And if it means that your lawyer, who also doesn't really want to be confrontational, if that means he has to start making threats, well, then he better well make those fucking threats because you're not leaving anything on the table. You're not punting any amount of money. Get the fuck out of here. So I was geared up for a fight because we did have a buyer for Dad's place, legitimate, and we were getting ready to sign the papers. But the timing was just not going to work. And again, in theory, it usually doesn't happen this way. Nothing in in the mid 1990s. You could see that no, the guy just needed another couple of weeks. But with that, I was geared for a fight. I thought to another lawyer and says, look, this guy is about to have the money to close. He just needs a little bit more time. Can we maybe make a payment to you? Because what is life after all? Life is a negotiation. It's not my client does this, will you give him until Labor Day? Yeah, that's fair. Okay, we have. All right, and you confirm when you've got the money. It was just that simple. Correctly, you should have asked more, whatever it could have been. But in that moment, I like to believe threats. Yeah, my dad occasionally would threaten a client with, we're going to take you to court if you don't pay your bill. But that's still that neither of them would have been caught short. They would have sold the first house very, very quickly. But if again, and that was the thing. A lot of stuff went wrong. But ultimately, in late August of 2023, everything came through. And at the closing, everyone was friendly. It was like we had come to the end of a journey and it had worked out for everyone. And even the realtor seemed happy that day to get this done because this is difficult stuff. Real estate is very complicated. Sometimes it Mrs. Cohen, would you like to buy this house? Yeah. Hey, 1 + 1 = 2. But usually, and especially if you have one and then you have another and you have to time it, I didn't have to time it. The mistake was trying to time it, as you can tell. So, what I mentioned about not even asking how long do I have to get out of the first house. So, I didn't move in here until November 2nd of 2023, closed in August. That means I continued to live in Huntington September and October. I had another 8 weeks living at my father's house. Now, this was something I did which was smart. This is something that my dad, especially the CPA, this is the first time all 2023 that if my old man could see it, he would have been laughing and he would have been saying, "That's my son. That's my son," in a good way, because he might say that in a negative way in a lot of other areas. But what I did was, rather than get movers together and get everything over here, because I could have done that, the woman who purchased my father's house wasn't moving in until the second week in November. And she simply asked me, she said, "You don't really have to go anywhere. Just as long as the place is completely cleaned out by the first week in November, you're fine." I don't have any intention of being there till probably November 15th. She didn't say, it was something like that. So what I did was I moved very slowly, literally and figuratively. I didn't want to spend a ton. It took a lot of money to get me out of the apartment. That was bad. It cost me thousands of dollars more than it should have because I ended up leaving in a rush. The landlady, she was going nuts. It was all ridiculous. But I moved my stuff here, one car ride at a time. I took everything I possibly could that would not need a moving truck, because obviously there are certain fixtures, dining room table, break front, king size bed, Those were going to need the truck. Everything else, all of my gym equipment, probably 800 pounds worth of stuff, I loaded it into the car. And that's how I did it. So as much money as I spent getting out of the apartment, I was able to save because I took thousands of pounds worth of stuff here starting in the beginning of September and all throughout September and October. I kept making trips here, but I never drove here without having something in the car that was going to end up here, either in storage, which I have some stuff stored in the garage, not surprisingly, or that I was going to be using immediately, like gym equipment. But the day that I found out for 100% certain that I was going to be able to close, that it was going to work out, that I had not blown it, that I had not disgraced the good name of Alan Philip Cohen and his father, my grandfather, Nathan Cohen, I hadn't blown it. It was August 7th, 2023, 2 years ago today, that I rejoiced. I had survived, like the song, I Will Survive, Gloria Gaynor. I had survived. I had managed to screw up repeatedly, but somehow, because I had a lot of people on my side advocating for me, vouching for me, it turned out A-OK. And here I am 2 years later. I have this room decorated exactly the way that I want to. I get to record. I get to share my stories, usually of movies, but other times of near colossal failures that ended up being okay in the final analysis. But you could take this episode as a cautionary tale. If you ever find yourself in a situation like me, ask every question and then some, and sell the first house ahead of time. Don't worry about how much of a buffer are we going to need here. Just sell the house. I'm living proof. You need to do it that way. Don't try to time it, because the chances are something's going to go wrong, or in this case, many somethings will definitely go wrong. But here we are on August 7th, 2025, and I can look back on my 2 years younger self and all of those mistakes and say they were all bad, but they weren't critical. They weren't fatal. They did not end. It was still a new beginning, me becoming a first-time homeowner at age 49. This has been episode 583 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Thursday evening here with me in New York. And if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon.